So we'll kick off now. Thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Catherine Ennis. I'm the HDR Industry Engagement and Placements Manager, and this is probably the seventh Professionals with a PhD webinar we've done so far since the middle of last year. I used to co-host them with my colleague Sally Purcell. Sally left us at the end of last year, but we still have all our recorded webinars up on our iLearn page if you want to check out other webinars we've had. We have a good range, different disciplines, so I definitely encourage you to check that out. I'm delighted to say we have Dr. Paul Hogan today from the Office of Corporate Engagement. Paul is our Executive Director of Office of Corporate Engagement, and he's with us today to share some details about his journey from his PhD to where he is now. And I'll just admit one more person. And maybe just before we kick off, Paul, what I'll do is hand you over in a few seconds. I'll do our acknowledgement of country, and then if you want to share your screen, if that's okay. Yep. So I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Watamatagal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the dream time. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. So with that, Paul, I'm going to stop sharing. And thank you and everybody for joining us today. Please feel free to start sharing when when it starts working for you.
Yep. No, we're all good, and thanks very much for that intro, Catherine. It's really delightful to have this opportunity, and hopefully, like, if there's one word I want to start with, it's just options. You've got so many options out there, and be optimistic, even if the current outlook, might have a few little clouds on the horizon. You have lots of options if you look and you inquire. So hopefully, everyone's sort of journey is not a bit bespoke. It will be bespoke, but hopefully I can sort of share a few observations with you on what I've picked up. Times have changed since I obviously finished my PhD, but I was still in pretty good touch with the people I went through with. We were all doing very, very different things. And I'm hoping I'll give you a bit of flavour of some of that variety, not because I think you should follow the same path, but just the things you think, can I do that? Yes, you can, with the right enthusiasm. So I'll start sharing my screen. Sorry, this is a little bit of a gallop through, oops, hang on, where are we? That's the one. A bit of a gallop through my career and also my function. Can you see that, Catherine? Is that all good?
Yep.
Screen?
Yeah. There's blocks in front of it, but maybe that will disappear.
What are they, the blocks? Or...
Can you see like two black blocks? Maybe when you move to the next slide, it'll be fine.
Yeah, nicely. Oh, there we go. Is that any better when I move? Yeah.
I'm still seeing them, but I think it may not obscure too much. I don't know if anybody else can see them, if anybody can mention in the chat.
Anyone? Yeah, just let me know if I...
Yes, they can see there's like two rectangular. It may be just the way the screen is downloading.
I'll just stop screen sharing just for a second. If I stop screen, yeah, I have, and I'll just check that I'm not seeing a similar thing.
Oh, okay.
So we'll try this again. Is that any better?
Still there.
Whereabouts are the blocks? So at least I can know where it's being obscured.
To the right, and then it may not obscure what you are going to show us, but it's like...
That's in the right-hand side of the screen?
Yeah, and then one at the very top, but that's not usually a problem. I don't think that will cause too many issues.
All right, well, let's just leap on. I think most of my wiser comments are on the left-hand side. Yeah. Okay, cool. So my current role is as Executive Director of Corporate Engagement. So what does that mean? So many universities have, and I guess the question around here is that if I understand the context, it's like a lot of people here doing PhDs kind of want to look at what are the options available to you as you sort of progress through your career. What are the sort of things you could do, and how does someone with a PhD end up in my kind of role? It's just in a nutshell, what does a corporate engagement function do? We are a cross-campus kind of university outfit. We try and connect researchers with companies. We kind of sit at the interface between the university and the business world, and that kind of drives everything we do. So trying to get new relationships started, trying to shepherd existing relationships. I'll give you a couple of case studies later, or at least I'll put them in the pack for you to look at. Things like Cochlear and other sort of examples. If you take the view that Australian universities historically haven't been very good at collaborating with industry, and yet the benefits of that are, greater relevance, places for our students, impact from our research, then that's kind of the fundamentals behind why we want to build these relationships. In a time now where we're seeing pressure on revenues, and people are very much looking to how do we build those connections to shore up the business and rely less on our government masters. So that's kind of what we do. We've got a team of about 8 people. Generally, we have an engagement person in each of the faculties, so that we get a bit of a deep view of what the faculty capabilities. And some of those people have PhDs, I might add too. And the advantage there, as we'll talk about later, is kind of it gives them a little bit more, it makes more tangible the capabilities and the skills of the people in there. If we were purely business development without any kind of real appreciation of particularly the research side, we might miss some of that stuff. We've also got some central people who manage some of the bigger relationships like Optus, Cochlear, emerging sort of AstraZeneca and others, just because they're complex things, they're institutional level, and it's very hard for institutions to keep track of the myriad of little interactions that are happening. So that's kind of what we do. Bit of my kind of journey. Again, not to say that this would be a path for everyone, but my beginning was as a chemical engineer. I was fascinated by renewable energy, and my starting project was solar powered water purification. I've got a really great knack of picking trends 10 years too early. So there was absolutely no money in it. The industry didn't want to know. Renewables were on the nose. And some of the early membrane technology, now it's ubiquitous. People talk about the desalination plant. All that stuff was still experimental sort of when I was going through. And I'd well and truly left the field by then. So there you go. Pick a trend too early and you miss out, I guess. So I started in that kind of technical role. Fortunately, while I'm a big fan of people engaging with industry really early, the last year of my PhD was pretty much sponsored by a winery, which is, has its own benefits anyway. But the fact that they were commercialising a technology pretty close to what I was doing and needed deeper technical help than they would normally need on a winery meant that by building up the relationship over a year, and I'm sure I was wholly appreciative of it actually getting me a job, but it did. This is where things like work experience and, Catherine is a great exponent of the APR intern program. Those things build familiarity. People hire people they know and people that they like and the people that they understand. And when you think of the imperfections behind any interview process, which when you think about it, if you've got an hour to prove yourself, unless you can work your magic, I can't. I'm much better off kind of wheedling my way into the system over a series of months where they can't then do without me, rather than try and prove myself in an hour. Internships, big fan of that. Big fan of work experience. Builds your credibility. You understand what it's like in the real world. I sort of hate that expression. It's not that we don't work in the real world, but you see the implied environment. So I was working under the pressures of a winery which has vintage. Vintage is where all the grapes are harvested and processed in a really complex period. I promise you, no one gives a bugger about research in vintage. They are 24/7 trying to make wine. So I learned pretty quickly to shut up, wait till vintage is over, and then I could do whatever I wanted. It's that kind of stuff that you work out This is sort of a threshold question for the people here who are doing doctorates. Is that there, comes a point, and I don't think it's a one-way street in this choice. But do I stay technical, or do I sort of come up a level and maybe go across managerial? Do I want to be? Have I found the area of technical excellence that I want to do for forever? For me, I hadn't. Though I have a feeling I probably didn't appreciate how transferable some of my knowledge it was across other technical stuff. I'd kind of thought, I feel like I'm becoming a bit of an expert in my big toe. I'm really good. No one knows more about my big toe than I do, but I don't think it's going to make me a quid. And there's only about 2 companies that are doing the sort of thing that I'm doing. So I felt my options were limiting. I would question that decision a little bit now, just going if I'd been a little bit more open-minded. And I think it's a different environment. I think the research, industrial research, is a little bit brighter than maybe it was there. So my view was that I wanted to understand, having seen our stuff funded by investment banks, I kind of thought maybe I want to understand more a bit how the commercial side works, the money side. So I did an MBA, which is kind of self-funded. It's a bit of a heavy-duty decision to do that. And I wouldn't necessarily say if you want to get into management or finance or anything like that you necessarily need to. I think, again, times have changed. You have so many more options around micro-credentials and little bits of experience that probably do the same thing. So MBAs in some sense as well. I'm not, don't want to say it wasn't a valuable degree. It was, particularly for people who are kind of a little bit siloed, perhaps. The number of engineers, lawyers, accountants who decided to do MBAs just to get out of their box was there were a lot of us, but it did allow me to move into corporate finance in PwC. So that environment, where does a PhD work for that? I'd thought, or maybe it's the more technical projects where they need technical expertise. Yes and no. Like, yes, where it happened to land right on the nutshell of your technical expertise, sweet. Rarely would that happen, but what someone with a doctorate, or at least someone who's done a bit of research, can add value there is a sense of risk. How developed is this? And that's kind of what the financier wants to know. Is it kind of really early, highly risky, or is it really developed, pretty much ready to go? And whereas, that's where kind of a perspective that you might bring could add value to it. But mainly what I was pulling out of that was, client focus, the importance of relationship development, of giving people in the room confidence that you can solve their problem, and in fact trying to find out what the problem is. It was funny when I went to Sustainability Victoria, where I then had a team of engineers, and they really couldn't communicate. I mean, I thought I was bad, but they couldn't communicate to save themselves. Their idea of adding value was to come to me and say, Paul, your problem's this. I'm going, I don't give it. What's the solution? I don't care whether, they mark their brilliance by telling me what the problem was. Okay, it's just awesome. That's half of it. And, the next bit is to say, yes, my brilliance is that I found exactly that problem. And for you to sort it out, now here's where the value is really added. This is what you could do. And here are your options. What would you like to do, Paul? That is value adding. So it was kind of, I kind of turned them around a little bit to get a bit more client focused. And just, it's not smoke and mirrors. It's just about reflecting the language of the client, trying to understand them. I think most jobs will benefit from people stepping back and trying to take understand the view of the client, and the view of the person on the other side. And particularly, as you see, I put that thing down at the bottom around sort of moving from technical to managerial, because if you work from, can I work as an individual? And maybe times have changed a bit, but research in my day was pretty an individual endeavour. It's your PhD book. It's all about you. There's probably a lot more team-based stuff now, and that's certainly, the jobs that I've seen more recently. I rely on a team. There's no way I can do what I do without a team. Not just my team. It's the connections around campus and the people who also have interesting client relationships. I won't dwell too much on the last sort of stuff, but I thoroughly recommend, if you have a crack at a startup, give it a go. I mean, that was just, there's only a certain times of life you can kind of afford to have a crack at that. And I certainly wasn't going to put the house behind it. But I had the opportunity to work in a company that was listing. It was in renewable energy crops. it was just fascinating. You know, in the world, it was just a completely different world of investors and ASX compliance and you know, just about a month after we listed, the GFC hit. So that, you know, that's a bit of a bugger. Not so much for us because we raised money, but a fascinating time to be in that. And like many startups, we ran out of steam as the sentiment in the community at the time, unfortunately, was moving away from renewables. So that, you know, I could tell that wasn't going to go anywhere, and then took my second role in government, which is New South Wales state government. Again, fascinating roles for PhDs there. I mean, there can be pure technical kind of roles there, but again, and I'll get to some of the skills that are transferable and applicable there. But I think those sort of impact kind of roles, and now in higher ed for me, like, and I'll get to a little bit more about sort of what my day-to-day looks like in a second. But when, you know, you define what you want your impact to be, it might be through your individual project, or it might be, in my case, sort of more as an enabler to others. So part of the brief was to kind of walk you through what a typical day is. Not that I find that there are too many typical days. I deal a lot with clients. I just listed a couple there that I'm talking to at the moment. Some of those are, it's just to shepherd it. So clients are going, well, you know, so someone like Stockland is sitting there with a major development in Macquarie Park. It is going to host the new headquarters of Johnson & Johnson. You know, their question to us is, gee, who could we attract to our development? Not just from a marketing perspective, but what works for all of us. Now, if we as a university, what I find that fascinating is, for us, for our advantage, it would be great to have more knowledge-intensive industries down there. Companies that are a lot more likely to take our graduates, more likely to do research with us, who have an economic multiplier from their jobs. Or it could just be the park as it often is, and just grows sort of organically, and maybe there's a lot of back office there that probably doesn't have the same prospects. So I find those sort of conversations pretty fascinating. I think a lot about how to amplify our reach. There's only a few of us in professional services helping academics engage. We have to kind of leave this capability legacy with academics for two reasons. One is because there aren't many of us, but the second is it's a critical skill now, I think, for academics. It wasn't maybe 10 or 20 years ago, at least 20 years ago. It just wasn't seen to be, you know, the bit of our industry. If the company didn't like it, what you're doing, you just found a better company, you know, and you run out of those options if you're too self-interested. I do a lot of, you know, team management, and that's just as part of the gig. As you kind of, whether it's rising or however you view it, as you go through your career, you are more likely to become more senior, and with that possibly comes people. And managing people is, so if you ever think you know how to manage people, get out of the game, because you're probably not a very good people manager. I just think that they will throw stuff at you all the time. Everyone is different. Trying to get the best out of people is really challenging. But it's really satisfying when you see someone succeed. You know, actually, you know, when people, you know, occasionally will come in staff who's sort of got another job somewhere, and the only time I would be disappointed by that is if it looks like it's a lesser job, because I think, well, they didn't kind of move up. If they didn't move up, then what do they get out of being my team? I would find that kind of a bit sad. Business development is a lot of what I do. It can have a bit of an irky sound to it. You know, this is not sales. This is exploring with people where we might work together to mutual benefit. If it is sales, it's a very soft sell. Often they'll come to us and go, how can we work together? They know we're a public institution. We're there for the public good. You know, we're happy to do stuff for profit. That goes through a different route. You know, it's contract research or whatever it is. But I don't find it at all challenging from that perspective. I don't find it. It's something that, you know, we as sort of, you know, perhaps if there's a lot of people on the call who are more technical type PhDs, I'm not sure, but it's often something we shy off from. But it's actually probably a lot more comfortable space when you view it as a pathway to impact, I think. Challenges. I think that that chronic thing of commercial versus academic motives, and that often plays out in things like time frame and responsiveness. And, you know, you might reach out to someone and say, hey, I've got a company who's really interested in this. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm on sabbatical, speak to you in September. And you go, oh, okay, well, I'll take that as a no. And that's not necessarily someone's fault. It is a product of the environment we're in, but trying to find that intersection is difficult. Everyone wants help, trying to distill it to the big university priorities and not the minutiae. And I think recognition, one of the previous PVCs once said to me, "Mate, your job is thankless." And I don't quite agree with it, but I think what they were saying is it's kind of like, it's not in some ways a function that people go out of their way to say, "Boy, that genesis of an idea and the connections that you made really drove my project." But occasionally people do really see that, and that's really nice. But I'm quite happy to be sort of understated and have that little internal yes when something comes off than necessarily sort of fanfare. Maybe it's just me. So and the satisfaction comes from those, they seeing that amplification happen. Because I think one, it's what I'm kind of paid to do. So, but also it's just something I truly believe that in the power of partnerships. And I saw that in government. I see it here that the most impactful partnerships are where you have academia, industry, government working together. That's just an amazing sweet spot, because you'll have the policy backup, the smarts, and the commercial reach, all coming together. That's something that sort of really, really drives me. This is my 2 cents worth on why you shouldn't be despondent if you're sitting there going, "What do I do with this thing now?" Because I remember when I was sort of starting to lead the technical bit, my boss at the time in the winery, he'd actually done an MBA himself, and I said, "I feel like am I throwing this PhD away?" And he said, "No, it will become useful to you in ways down the pipe that you won't possibly imagine." And that was a very smart thing to say. I had not used my title as doctor in 20 years before I came here. And I'll get to why sometimes that's a good thing to use and sometimes not. But I honestly hadn't used it. And then suddenly I was told after the interview, "Sorry, mate, you have to be called doctor." And I go, "What?" Okay, I roll with it now. And in some ways I sort of think maybe I'd cringe from it a bit. And it was right to sort of, that's your title. You'll have earned the title, own it, I'm just picking up something from probably the voice or something there. But I think, we can be, it's a hell of an achievement, the tenacity that you have to go through. So I think, the professional skills, if you think in terms of skills and capability rather than, just your technical, you've got great technical expertise. You've done that to death. You've got that bit. Academically, awesome. But that's actually quite transferable when you think in terms of capabilities. And that's why you see a lot of firms talk about their capability framework, because they know they can't train you with the world moving as it is. They can't train you for everything. And you've got to be adaptable and learn. So you've got the ability to pick up technical and other sort of really difficult concepts. Smart people, you're analytical, you're structured. You can turn that into something that other people can understand. This is really valuable stuff. I could really see, certainly a couple of roles in government, I could tell people who'd done higher degrees and particularly the humanities side, you could see them distill an argument in a way that me as an incomprehensible engineer could probably never do. The personal skills you've picked up that, again, you may not recognise, that persistence, that the sort of the search for, I'll say objectivity, but that kind of thing where you publish when you know it's true and you've got the backup to do it. There's an integrity part of that that comes through in the values. Hopefully, you've worked on your communication in a way that I know my lot didn't, and I wish I had. And teamwork, I'll put a question there because I know in my sort of time through it, teamwork was not a big thing. And I hope that that's changed a lot because technical disciplines have fused in a way that, people couldn't imagine. And, you're not a siloed this or that or whatever now. So that teamwork and being able to, draw from other disciplines is really important. What do you build on? And I don't want to devalue the PhD here or say you've got to do lots and lots more training. I think that we never stop learning. We've got to keep building on our skills, but, dovetail it with, a bit of rapid immersion in industry to soak it up and feel what it's like to try and get your stuff done when you've got the other commercial pressures around you. Big fan, even though I was pleased, actually, I was at lunch last week and the Mayor of Rye, Jerome Blexale, was across from me and he made some comment that he's actually an introvert. I mean, the guy's out there all the time, but he's actually an introvert. And I said, well, so am I. And he said, he goes to these networking events and he goes home and crawls up in a ball and tries to recover. But it's the one thing that, it's not for everyone, but if you take the view that the worst thing that can happen is that I don't have any interest in conversations and go away, and the best thing is that you'll just find out something you didn't, you'll make a connection. Just I have to coach myself every time, but almost 90% of the time, once you're comfortable with a network, it's far easier to do. I thoroughly encourage people to do that, because it goes from I'm coming here cold, I don't know anyone, to then it's that's that bloke from Macquarie, then that's Paul from Macquarie, it's Paul from Corporate Engagement from Macquarie, then hi Paul, how are you? It's just, it becomes more comfortable over time as you're repeating those networks and becoming more familiar with it. That commercial exposure bit, I think, is a great counterpoint to some of the technical disciplines, because then you understand how the company really works. If you're in a corporate environment, particularly, or an SME, or even a startup, this has got to somehow turn into dollars at some point. The client interpersonal bit, again, I think that's just something people learn, and it's invaluable for teams. That you can how to navigate your way around tricky issues, and the management and leadership bit. I'm a big fan that sort of stuff can be taught. It's not, oh God, I don't feel like I'm a manager. Baby steps. At some point it's almost like you're going to get promoted whether you like it or not, because people get older and they move on, and these spots open up, and then suddenly they're going to look at you as the next most experienced. So, and I guess that final comment at the moment, you're building on your skill set doesn't devalue what you've done at all. I came back to, I occasionally revisit the PhD through the career, but the credibility that just occasionally sort of lobbing it out there does is kind of pretty useful, and particularly for this job, I wouldn't have got it without the doctorate. I know that. I wouldn't have got it. They said that the fact that I'd done it meant that I had to meet every single executive dean to get through the convoluted interview process, which had a panel of 10. And the bit you'd done a PhD kind of went right, and not because it was kind of like, you will have some credibility with our academics, rightly or wrongly, but it kind of helped. So I'm going, awesome. So again,
telling everybody.
Reflecting back on that comment of my manager at the time, it will become useful to you in ways that you can't possibly imagine. Mm-hmm. So, I think it was the capability sets had always been of use, and then suddenly the piece of paper, I could roll it out, along with a couple of other ones, and that kind of sealed the deal.
Sorry, Paul, would you mind just repeating that statement you have there? It looks like it's got the little black block on it.
Oh yeah, it says
on your skill set.
Building on your skill set does not value your PhD. It does not devalue your PhD.
Thank you.
It all adds on. It's not a binary decision between one or the other. They actually do feed into each other, providing, again, you think in terms of capability and not necessarily your technical discipline. I won't dwell too much. I'll leave these in the pack for people to see, but that's an example of the kind of partnerships that sort of gets us excited. Cisco, well-known company, wanted to really promote female inclusion, had their own program. We connected it up, put 50 students through the networking academy piece, and did the deal to make sure that our students have access to that, a good skill and an additional qualification. They're part of other projects, potentially part of the Meadowbank project as well. But that's the kind of stuff that we deal with. And you can imagine Cisco comes in saying, who do we talk to? We're a bit of a concierge, front door, project manager, keep the momentum up, cajoler of other people who need to respond and keep the relationship on track. It's like, in my mind, the model that I apply is very much what I saw in professional services, where you kind of have an account manager and a mess behind you that the client does not need to see. And when you walk in, it's like, it's sweet, no problem. And you've got the right people lined up, and you've had the chats beforehand, and you've not confected, but you've got your ducks lined up and the right people in the room, so the client can really get to the point, and we can get to the pointy end of what we might be able to do with them. So that's kind of the role, and sort of being able to communicate with the different academics, helps that. I won't dwell on this. I mean, this is sort of how to frame the whole of university expertise in a way that talks to the industry. Again, it's just an example of client-centric thinking. If defence or a defence company came to the university, they wouldn't know where to start. Yet we put together a capability statement that kind of just, not just in broad brushstrokes, saying, here are the big issues in your industry, here's how we might answer them. And we didn't mention one faculty deliberately, because industry doesn't think like faculties. They just want to know what you do and what you're good at and how it solves their problem. So it's just, you know, that communication piece, you know, and that's why it's kind of vital as we come out of technical degrees, being able to turn it into layman's kind of terms, and then people understand why it's important. If you can answer the question, why should I care, and get that snappy piece kind of, so that when someone says, well, what do you do, and you don't bore them to death, then that's great. You know, if you can do it in a paragraph, it's great. The MPID project, Macquarie Park Innovation District, is another sort of passion of mine. It's actually why I took the job here, because I was in government thinking that is really interesting that the university is trying to work with the business community and local stakeholders. Again, it tweaked in my mind that power of the government, industry, academia partnership. So I really am interested in this. And I came to a forum that David Wilkinson had run, and he's my boss now, the DVC engagement. And I think, you know, we've got such a leading, you know, people see, even though it's a really difficult program to run and requires constant attention, people see this particular project as a real differentiator for Macquarie. I won't dwell on that. I guess just a couple of comments on this. Like if you are engaging with industry, it's just to give you some comfort that you do have skills and there's something about you that will apply to industry. You got to sort of make your time to do it. You got to have the right mindset. Just don't push yourself too hard. I think it's kind of get out there and just be curious and just soak it up for a while. When I say set yourself up for serendipity, it's like research. You know, if you don't sort of lay a few bets and get out there and just sort of test the waters a bit, the chance occurrence just won't happen. I've found it really difficult generating leads without physical networking events in the last year, because the magic kind of doesn't happen so much in Zoom. And I think sort of being there physically really helps. I've talked about the communications piece and just around, you know, just engaging generally. You know, there's different ways you can do it, you know, and do the way that sort of works for you. It might be through an industry forum, could be it could be a company event, council event, big chamber of commerce, whatever. I think the main point here on broadening your horizons is just, you know, get out there, try and understand the other bits that drive industry, if that's your path, or universities as a business, if that's your path. And investing in education, again, not to devalue the PhD, but you can see how the other bits, I mean, I found the other bits that I've added on, but for the heavy duty MBA, which, you know, I had to stop work for, 18 months and kind of do it. That's what I'm sort of saying. You know, that's a big call, and one that, you know, I could do at the age of 20, whatever I was, you know, at the age of, 32 that I am now. Obviously, I can't, but, and just that, it's random comments on interview prep, just because I think if you the impressions that you make, one, I'd much prefer you get out there with an internship to get a job. But if you're going to be in there, be enthusiastic, have thought about the role and provide evidence of how you can solve their problem. And the extra bit is to think about whoever you're applying for a job for, whether it's academic or industry, and make sure that you've thought about the value add. Even if you get it wrong, I know if I'm in an interview panel and someone said, I think you're doing this, and I reckon maybe here's a few ideas that I'd bring to the table. They might be way off base, but I'm thinking they're trying to add value. That's good. Actually thinking beyond, here's my resume. Aren't I great? I guess that just because we're on that kind of career piece, and just facing a few realities here, like academia is going to be challenging for a bit. You can see throughout the whole industry as it's sort of shrinking. How that what that means is that a lot of really employable people will be on the market. That's going to be really difficult to get into. Let's not be, let's not beat around the bush on that one. Doesn't mean there might be bits and pieces, but it is going to be more challenging than it has been. So, there's things that you can do in the meantime if you still want to be in academia that get you that kind of industry exposure, because the whole industry academic piece is coming back in vogue in a big way. You watch our Macquarie job families really build room for the enterprise professor, the industry academic who's coming in with lots of business connections as a way to accelerate that interface, which we think is a really key plank for going forward. the stuff on the right is, try and look for the growth. In the meantime, there are whilst it's not all doom and gloom out there. There's some real investment in particular areas. You watch the big pipelines into infrastructure, watch climate change come back in a big way. There's some industries that are doing really well. I think interesting talking to ex-colleagues in government, not from the COVID point of view, but after the bushfires, they were actually, whilst they were absolutely run ragged, their sense of purpose was really galvanised after years of cutbacks and being beaten around the head and, all the presses, all these fat cat public servants and all that sort of crap. Suddenly, the public worked out they really need a good, solid public service. And between that and COVID, I think that's really kind of renewed some of the value of it. Because this is my final slide. And the one bit that's probably blocked out is a column that says, essentially he's a PhD in SVT. And this is completely, going against the tide of well thought out and lots of truckload of evidence behind. This is straight out from my, from my ear. As to just having been in a few roles, what are the dimensions of a job and how they might or might not appeal to you? If you want money, possibly the corporate sort of industry side, maybe. Startup potentially with high growth, depending on what it is. Government and higher ed tend to be maybe slightly less money, but maybe more stable. You find the lifestyle bit of the, I don't know if you see the icon, it's a little hamster wheel. It's you're kind of the slave of the corporate master there. In the startup, I've got a little mouse there. You can at least control the mouse. You got more of your own destiny in a startup. You're a small team. You live or die together, whatever. Government, maybe. I mean, I find it sort of depends on what level you're at too. Once you get into the senior ranks anywhere, you're going to get flogged. That's just how it is. It's just a product of some seniority that benefits that come with that, higher remuneration, higher pressure. Risk reward. Societal impact. There's a lot of impact, positive impact you do in society. I'll put a little jigsaw puzzle there because sometimes you feel like you're a piece of the puzzle, not the big thing. Startups, definitely there can be big societal impacts, but it tends to be all about the shareholder entrepreneur type thing, which might be you. So it can be a little bit sort of insular. But that's not hard and fast. I find government, big picture, awesome for, government. I heard it described as kind of a bit of a tank. It's kind of pretty slow and unwieldy, but it can do some major things, hopefully not damage, but it can do some really sort of good things. And I think, like with higher ed, similarly, we've kind of got that big societal impact bit. So it's all about matching your motivations. Risk, there's risk in any job. Corporate, startup, very high risk. Yes, you sort of go in knowing that you've got a finite lifespan and you see how you go. Government and higher ed are not the riskless things that people maybe view them in as the past. All these organisations are reforming. Someone said when I got into government, oh, well, that's a job for life. I went through 3 restructures in 2 years and just, it isn't that easy. I think the lesson behind it is never take your job for granted. I feel very privileged to do the job I do, but I don't ever sort of take for granted that I've got a job for life or, I'm here sort of cemented in, because the day you do, you're not sort of respecting the people who employed you to do the role, and you're probably not getting as much out of the role as you could. So I'll read it, the PhD bit for corporate, is it maybe not necessary, valuable, depending on what it is. Is it a technical R&D role? Yes, definitely. Is it a managerial role? Maybe. Reputationally, possibly. I saw mainly in the health side that, there's still a lot of kudos there and they use those titles. Startup kind of depends. You could be the technical person in the startup for a particular product. If you're the entrepreneur, maybe less so, though I see a lot of entrepreneurial PhDs. Government, definitely a place for that. And again, it could be technical or in policy. There's a lot of solid people in the Office of Chief Scientist and Engineer who have doctorates, not doing technical stuff, but understanding the scientific and the higher ed landscape. And in higher ed, I've got 3 ticks on that one because I think it was definitely part of me getting a job. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a romp through kind of my views of the world. Happy to take questions, Catherine.
Thank you, Paul. That was amazing. I really enjoyed that. And I have a few questions in the chat, which I'm going to go through now. What was that? Sorry, can you see them?
I can't say. If I stop sharing, should I do that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Maybe the first one there is, When you need to work with multidisciplinary manager, supervisor / team, and then the conflicts happen, how do you deal with it professionally?
Well, don't punch anyone. That's a starting point. I mean, conflict, or we call it conflict, but differences of opinion happen all the time. I think it's mainly, the main thing is that it doesn't get personal. It's objective, and you sort of work out what the basis of the disagreement is, and work out a way forward. It might be, you think A, I think B, and I'm happy that whilst I, my position, we'll try A first, for whatever reasons. But if that doesn't work, we'll try B. I mean, I think the main thing is that it's not, the minute it sort of gets personal in conflicts, that's where it gets really difficult, and really hard to unwind, because once people have kind of, personally injured each other, it's really hard. You've got to build trust. So you find that you can have, the more you personally trust each other, then the more you can have those difficult discussions. And that's true in any role, in any job, whether it be manager or staff to staff. I don't know if that sort of answers everything, but.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Building trust and maintaining professionalism.
Because then people know where you're coming from, and they're not second guessing your motive.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. We have 2 more questions in the chat, but I do notice Matt's hands up. So Matt, do you want to unmute maybe? We have Arslan.
Sure. Hi, Paul. Hi, Catherine. Look, I'm just wondering if you see perhaps a growth in corporate engagement in the future, particularly in Sydney and Canberra and the Eastern Seaboard.
For universities, or?
Yes. Do you think there's a growing trend in
what I see is the appetite is there, the economic circumstances are not. I think that's going to be really challenging for anyone in Israel, just because all the universities taking such a hit. I don't see expansion in my area, to be frank. Purely through the economic circumstances of the university right now. I think that will come back sooner rather than later. I can see that within, it's sort of at odds with a university plan which says we need to diversify revenue and build relationships and do the part. All that stuff is strategically vital for the university, which has just got to have the right wallet to be able to support that goal. And right now it's really challenging to do that. So I think we're going to be will be a step back before we take a couple of steps forward. I'm certainly optimistic that with the, when you look at the policy environment from Canberra, our major shareholder in the universities, which is, in 2 words, be relevant, right? Be relevant. Make the people you train relevant to industry. Make the stuff you do relevant to industry. In some ways, I feel that it potentially devalues fundamental research a little bit, but just to respond at least to their policy mantra, it requires the interfaces to be built up in a way that they haven't been there for a while. I mean, I talk a lot to different people in a similar function in universities. We all have kind of the same challenges, and I think a lot of it is sort of cultural change, because we have in the past anyway sort of developed. Our mantra on product flow of academics coming out is like they're being bred for academia. Maybe that's not quite the case, as we're sort of signalling that, we've got to, given that most of the people doing doctorates will in fact not end up in academia, it is vital they understand industry, and that will actually then flow back over time into more industry-orientated academics and potentially more applied research. I mean, I certainly don't want to disparage sort of the fundamental research, because I think that if we as universities don't do it, it's not publicly funded, it's not going to get done. But you hope that it stays at a certain base load and the other stuff grows from it. It has to grow, Matt. I'm just not sure when that will happen. And I think it'll be scaled as the economy improves.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks. And I see your hand up, Arslan. Do you maybe want to jump in? I haven't forgotten about your question, Andrea. I'll definitely get to that. But Arslan, do you want to unmute and join us, or you still have your hand up, Arslan? Okay, we'll move to Andrea's question. I'm not sure if you're having difficulty.
Thanks, Catherine. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. This is Arslan. First of all, thanks, Paul, for the presentation and amazing insights. I have recently submitted my thesis at the Department of Engineering, and I'm working as a technical analyst at Dell Technologies. But based on my experience, I just wanted to ask you regarding the role of universities in revamping the PhD structure to meet the current demands of the industry. For example, if someone, no matter a student comes to any department for PhD in any of the subject, they can go to MGSM for a semester or two and have a project management course. And by the end of it might end up adding an extra semester or 1 year to their PhD, but once they graduate out, they don't have to worry about taking another degree just to get the project management and have that experience what other people have based on the experience they have been working in the industry. Or for example, in Europe, they have Marie Curie industry PhDs. So maybe universities can work on the design of the PhD programs in a way that they already have industries providing the problems.
Aslan, that you were talking about in Europe, they had what was that called?
The Marie Curie industry PhD program. Mm-hmm. So I haven't seen those kind of big programs in Australia yet. Maybe there are a few. For example, Cisco, CSIRO, they provide opportunities for the research and to do a collaboration project, but I haven't seen specifically dedicated PhD programs that comes from industry based on their problems and then students work with them to solve them. I think UTS has one industry PhD program. I'm not sure if Macquarie has one, but yeah, that's my concern, whether universities are playing their role to make sure that the PhD structure is consistently revamping according to the current demands.
Really good points there. And one, I'm thrilled that you've got a job with Dell in the park, by the sounds of it, and that hopefully that you've built that relationship over time, leaving that job. That's fantastic. You're absolutely right that redesigning these degrees to be more relevant and flexible to industry. Is it we do student and then they go to industry, or is it industry says actually we've got some staff here that we want to join with you and bring them up to speed with a PhD? Having that project management option as part of the degree is fantastic because it will, in fact, kind of just put some structure around the technical side that will really appeal to a commercial party, I think. Well, not just commercial, it's like, I find even my roles, finding people with good project management skills is really quite difficult. And I say, can I just give me a project plan, right? So that I know that they can break down a problem into a series of steps, work out who they really need to work with on do it, identify the risks. This kind of basic thinking that often people ignore. So, having more industry relevant PhDs would also solve the problem. But it's really difficult to get domestic students to do some of that postgraduate stuff because they don't fully see the value of it, where some of our overseas students, people do. And that's a real problem, as people either don't see the salary increment, which isn't quite true. You may not see that initially, but again, it's one of these things where if you wait over time, you'll find all these things will line up a bit. But I think that we don't have, I've seen a couple of really good examples at Macquarie where there's an industry-funded PhD program coming out of, I think it might have been Mush. So 5 of the pharma companies got together to collaborate to solve a supply problem, essentially. They didn't have enough health economists, I think, and pooled their money to sponsor 5 PhD students. Now, bit of a leap of faith in them because you don't know which company they're ultimately going to go to, but at least the industry says there's critical skills missing here. It is in their interest to kind of collaborate on that. So lots of potential to do that. I see a few of those spending industries that are more likely to do it, infrastructure, defence, others. So I think I'd support your comment that if we can get something that is more relevant to the PhD, to industry and builds in the industry-based problem from day one, as opposed to an afterthought, that would be more effective.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Paul. And just maybe to add there, I think there'll be some interesting developments hopefully this year in adding more training opportunities for HDR candidates generally. We are going through a bit of a state of change, and we'll probably hopefully know more about how we will look structurally in the next month or so, and that'll help us be able to plan better and build in those. But great comments in terms of project management. I think it's a really good idea to see we have these opportunities here. How can our PhD students tap into something like a project management unit in MGSM? Like a micro credential rather than the whole MBA, as you said, Paul. It can be heavy duty.
Yes.
About the APR intern program, if I could just add, the program is currently going under more change. They're going to be moving under ATSE, Australian Academy for Technology, Science and Engineering, I believe. They are going to take over the APR intern program, and in the new financial year, they will have some maybe different way of doing it, but I would say I'd hope it's still relatively the same, where students can take internships, short-term internships with industry. They fund it, you get a stipend, for 3 to 5 months. So I know you're moved on, and it sounds great that you have that position now, Arslan. But hopefully for people who come after you, there will be more opportunities. And of course, as well, from domestic and international, because their APR interns program was heavily slanted towards domestic funding, and hopefully that will be a bit more equitable in the future.
Yep, thanks. Greatly appreciate your response.
No problem. And just, we have time for Andrea's question. If the commercial industry you work with would like to collaborate with the university relating to product research, how to approach this without conflict of interest?
That's a really good question. I think the university has turned its mind to that, and has sort of policies around it. Essentially, you don't want to be in a position where you're endorsing something without. I'm trying to think where a conflict of interest might arise is things like, I saw a proposal with a supplements kind of company, and you could quite easily have your research warped into a way that sort of tells you that, vitamin B may cure baldness or whatever, I don't know. And I think those things are sort of declared up front. We have to be clear on the industries that we will and will not work with. So, as an example, the university won't work with the tobacco industry, and I think there are a few other bits and pieces that it's understood we don't necessarily make it massively publicly known, but there are certain industries that we choose not to be part of. So we don't sort of look to support an industry that we're not philosophically or ethically aligned with. So that's kind of part. I think in terms of, it's not wrong, I don't think, for a university to do some independent testing to validate the performance of a product in an objective way. And it just needs to scope and frame its response in that way, so it's understood what we are and what we're not supporting. It's not saying that the other products, for example, are worse, unless it's some sort of side-by-side comparison, but it's just, you're objectively analysing the performance of something. That's kind of where we've got a bit of a value add. It's fully remunerated. To that sort of stuff tends to be contract research, so it's not us trying to get conflicts where we're trying to do papers with it at the same time, because that's where you can get a bit mucky. It's like, is this commercial research? So they pay more for it, and they just get it's the client's property, here's the results done, versus partnerships type of stuff, which is where the conflicts of interest are probably more important.
I think we can contact the commercialization office as well if there's any queries that you may have, and we could maybe, I think we're actually due to maybe have another session with commercialization for HDR candidates this year. It's probably time we started organising that. But thanks, Paul. And just a comment from Kevin to say that he's not a student, as you know, but these insights have been really relevant and really appreciates the talk.
We'll wait for his enrolment. He might already have one. So
we'll see. Thanks, Paul.
Do we have any more questions? Please feel free to unmute or maybe put your hand up and we'll see you. We just have a minute or two more. But maybe while we're waiting, Paul, is there anything further you want to add? I think you've done a very comprehensive overview and a very candid approach to it, which I really appreciate. I think our PhD candidates are really going to appreciate and benefit from this webinar.
Yeah, nothing really to add. I think is don't feel pigeonholed. Like I say, you have options. Your issue will be choice, not having options.
Mm-hmm.
Be persistent and hang in there and have a lot of cups of coffee and talk to people. It's fun. One thing I found professionally too is that you know, you'll get people reaching out saying, can I have a cup of coffee with you? And you know what they're doing. They're kind of looking for work, but it's absolutely understood. And you know, if I reached out to someone and asked the same question, they'll take the meeting in a heartbeat, because it's just professional etiquette as you're looking at trying to understand jobs. And they might say to me, you know, do you have any jobs? And I'll say, no, I don't. Yeah, but what are you looking for? And just a couple of little thoughts that I might have on what they're looking for, or another contact. You know, it's just how the network works. We do try and help each other. So you know, do feel, you know, like reaching out and talking to people in the sort of areas you're interested in. You know, that they'll know what you're doing. They know that you're trying to do your groundwork, and rather than think that you're, you know, trying to do something sort of under the radar or something, that they'll know that you're just making genuine inquiries to try and inform your career decisions. Perfectly acceptable and encouraged.
Definitely. I think I totally agree. Network development, and happy to hear you're also similarly an introvert like me. Even, you know, we're doing these roles where people expect you to be schmoozers. It's not the way we work. It's more, you know, it's a two-way process. You know, these things take time. You don't go in there and wow them with your charm. It's a time, you know, it's a time-bound thing. It takes a while to build these relationships. They don't start out, you know, begin overnight. So anything you do today to start building relationships is not going to be a waste of time.
Totally agree with that.
Cool. I think that we're just at the time now, so it might be a good time to wrap up. But again, thanks, Paul. I really appreciate your hour today out of your extremely busy schedule. Things are only going to get more hectic this year, I think, in terms of industry engagement. So thanks again. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
And thanks, everyone, for joining us. Look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thank you.